Okay, so moving ahead, I want to give you an overview from CEWF's perspective of where we've been this year. And then Anna's going to explain to us how she actually made it all happen. And you'll recall last year, if you were here, we all went away with the impression that we finally understood what a huge job she really has. But it was never as big as this year. So here we go. Okay, how do I make it go up here? There it goes. Okay, just quickly, recalling where we've been in the past, this is the overall map of the Trans-Severn Waterway, all the way from Georgian Bay in the in the west down to Trenton on Lake Ontario. The orange line is the waterway, the canal system, which is almost 400 kilometers long with 45 locks. But we're focused today on the reservoir area up here in the north. Why are we going backwards? I threw this map in because I found it in my old files. It's just a map that shows all of the water control structures in the Trans-Severn, well over 100. Every dot on that map is a water control structure that Anna has to have her team manage. So I just wanted to impress you with that degree of complexity. We're of course interested in the reservoir area. That's the three watersheds in the north, in the center part of this map: the Gull watershed, the Burnt River watershed, and what we call the Central Lakes, which is the combination of Nogeese, Mississauga, Eels, and Jack watersheds. It's really important, I think, that each person looking at these issues today thinks about where their lake is in the system. It's always tempting to only think about our own lakes, but it's really important to see where you sit. So this is a schematic of the Gull system. The important thing in the Gull is here at Boschkong and 12 Mile, north of Minden, there's the convergence of three different watersheds. There's the, how did I get to there? My goodness, this is crazy. There's the watershed that comes down from Kinesis Lake up at the top there through Halls and Hawk, and with several very large reservoirs on it, and comes into Boschkong. Then from the west, you have the Cushog chain coming in. And from the east, you have the Maple Lake chain coming in. That means that the flow, once it gets to Boschkong, all three major tributaries come together and have to share the channel all the way down to Balsam Lake, including through the heart of Minden. So this is a very complex watershed. The most complex part of it is probably the Maple Lake chain, where you will see in the diagram here, looking at the cursor, there are no dams below the 5 reservoirs that are way upstream. The dams upstream are quite large lakes, Redstone, Eagle, and Oblong Halliburton. In particular, those 4 are very large reservoirs, and they drain down through the Maple Beach Cameron system. And that's really flow through, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. Here's the Burnt River system. The Burnt River system is interesting because more than half of the drainage basin has no control downstream. Up at the top end, you have Drag Lake. I know it's hard to see this cursor, but here's Drag Lake up at the top. The next dam on that branch of the Burnt is the Canning Dam, and the Canning Dam controls Canning Lake, Kashawigamog, Sawyers, Head Lake, and Grass Lake, all controlled by that one dam. So that channel of the Burnt is well under control. Then there's the central channel. I'm sorry, can you see this cursor? Okay, the central channel down from Nisquaby and down into the Drag River. And then in the southern part of the Burt River, we have the Irondale River, and you'll notice there's no control on the Irondale River itself. Almost all the reservoirs in the Irondale system come directly into the Irondale River, and then the Irondale has no control, and it becomes part of the Burt River, going down through Kinmount and all the way down to the Canal Lakes without any further control. So it's a very, very flashy system. Almost always extreme flooding in the municipality of Burt River down at the bottom every spring, and very difficult to manage because once you get halfway down the system, Anna has no controls at all. And then you have in the Central Lakes. But if you're up in the Burt or the Gull, you have to always be thinking, who's upstream of me and who's downstream of me, and what does it take to manage our lake levels? They're not managed independently. Whereas if you're down in Central Lakes where I am, they can be managed more independently because it's a straight connection down to the canal. So that's just kind of the overall structure. Now let's look at what happened this year. What happened this year was truly exceptional. A year ago, we told you how exceptional the last 3 years had been. Nothing like 2023, 24. So here's the precipitation figures for starting in September, when we were here last year, September of 2023, and coming through until March. And every month had less than normal precipitation. So if you look at the third column of numbers here at the red numbers, the percentage of the normal precipitation back in September was 27%. When we got into the winter, it was around 80% in November and December and January. But in February, it was back down to 35%. But the more important thing about the winter situation was we had warm temperatures and we had several very significant rainfall events, which means those of you who wanted to go snowmobiling or cross-country skiing at Christmas or at New Year's had lots of problems because there was very little snowpack around. And in many areas, there was no snowpack when we got to January 1st. But then it built up a little bit. But when we got into February, we had only about 21 centimeters of snow on the ground at the end of February, when we should have had 42. In terms of the average. Trent Severn, of course, monitors everything all the time. And one of the things they monitor in the winter is through snow surveys that they do every Friday. And here's the results of the snow survey for the week of the 26th of February. And that week, the Kinesis snow survey course had 60% of its normal snow. Little Bob, which is just below Minden here, had 47% of its normal snowpack. Emily Park, which is down closer to Peterborough, had 60%. Eagle Lake, up in the Maple Lake chain, had 60%. And over at Simcoe, they had nothing. So there was very little snowpack. And of course, we know that our spring runoff and what fills our reservoirs normally comes from a combination of spring rains and snowmelt, but especially snowmelt. So the result was that Trent Severn took the exceptional decision in February to start putting logs back in our reservoir dams a full month early. And so in the week of the 22nd, they dealt with what they call the hardest lakes to fill. And after that, by the 27th of February, all of the reservoir dams had some logs put back into them. And from that point on, there was active management of water levels on all of our lakes and all of our connecting channels. Really an exceptional decision, which made all the difference. Then we came to the spring and summer. And if you look at the red numbers here in the third column starting in April, first of all, in February, when they put the logs back into our dams, we got only 35% of the normal precipitation. And then in March, we got only 60% again. And we had very little snowpack, and it wasn't being added to by rain or snow at the normal rate. But then came April. Remember, the target here is always the end of May, the 24th of May, when the canal opens, and we'd like to think that the canal opened with full water and that all of our reservoirs were getting close to full too. That's the norm. And strangely enough, we got to the norm. We were very close when we got there. But look at the precipitation since April. 157%, 134%, 148%, 136%. And I can't read August there, but I think it's about 150% of normal precipitation. And this data is all from the Halliburton headquarters office of Trans-Severn Waterway, where they have a recording rain gauge or precipitation gauge. So we went from 7 months of below average precipitation to 5 months of way above average precipitation. Now, the other thing that you all recognize about the precipitation we had in the 5 months since the system opened is that we've had a lot of extreme rainfall events. It's not like we got a little bit of rain every week, like maybe we used to think we did. That was kind of the normal. We had a few days of sunshine and a little bit of rain and then more summer. This year, we had some really, really significant rainfall events that were very spatially different across our area. I put in this slide because this is the data from 4 major rainfall events that occurred at the end of June and early July, which is when all of our lakes, especially those in the upper Gull, went above normal and stayed there for the rest of the summer. But the important thing here is look at this center one here for the event that we had on from the 20th to the 23rd of June. A really major burst of rainfall. 84 millimeters up at Kinesis, and only 50 down through the Gull and into the Central Lakes. I can't read that bottom one. I should find it because it's important. I got it right here. Yes, because at Crystal Lake, which is typical of the Central Lakes, in this second column, they had only 30 millimeters of rain. So almost 4 inches up in Kinesis and only 1 inch down below, and 2 inches through the central part of the reservoir area. So this is the challenge, and it's not even that simple. Every rain gauge was getting different amounts, and every lake was responding in different ways, and that's what the water management team had to face. If you look at these other storms, you see the same kind of thing. I mean, here in the July 10th and 11th in the last column, you've got a situation in which they had over 2 inches in the Burnt River, but up in the upper Gull where they didn't need it, they got less than 1 inch, which was good news. And at Crystal Lake, they got towards 2 inches. So the important thing here is to just realize how variable the precipitation was this summer. So this is the whole story all here on one side. Just to review, drier than normal conditions from September to March, 7 months with below normal precipitation. Then we had a warmer than normal winter with significant rainfall events and melt events. Mid-February snowpack was 50% or less across the entire Trent Basin. That is all the way down to Lake Ontario. Parks Canada began adding logs with this exceptional decision a month early. Good news, great decision. Above normal precipitation then occurred with significant rainfall events for 5 months starting in April. But there was this high degree of spatial variability that had to be managed. And this required active water management throughout the year. But the system, including the waterway and all our reservoirs, was essentially full or nearly full in terms of the reservoirs and ready for opening by May 24th. And we tracked pretty close to normal conditions. the message is pretty clear here. Overall, we had outstanding water management under very extreme conditions this year. And we have to say thanks to the water management team for a really outstanding service job this year. Now, I just want to look quickly at some of the lakes to show you what happened. Here's Kinesis. If you look at the spring situation back here in early March, when they put the logs back in, you'll see that the water level came up almost a month ahead of normal. The difference between the blue line and the brown line, which is the long-term average. And by the time we got to late April, the two lines were pretty close together. And they were able to manage the water levels up to normal until we got to those rains at the end of June and early July, when many of the reservoirs went significantly above their normal summer levels, and then tracked at that level above the average line all the way through until now. As of this week, almost all of the lakes are back to the average line as they're managing towards that October 15th minimum level. Here's Hawk Lake, downstream of Kinesis. Exactly the same pattern. You can see the spring filling quickly, and then you can see the active water management all the way through the season, and surplus water in the upper gull. Now, the upper gull had to keep that surplus water because the canal lakes were also full. And for much of the summer, Anna was passing near the maximum flow she could down the Otonabee River, and she'll explain that to us and through Peterborough, because there are constraints. There are constraints with respect to the navigation in the waterway. If there's too high a flow, the velocity of water movement is too high for the boats, for the ships. And they had, 2 years ago, they had to shut the canal in order to pass surplus water. But this year, they just gradually let it out of the upstream reservoirs. Here's Cushog, the third branch of the upstream reservoir, the second branch of the upstream reservoirs. Looks a lot like the other upper gull reservoirs in terms of the patterns. Here's Oblong Halliburton, which is one of the three large reservoirs upstream of Maple. Again, from June on, the end of June on, there was extra water in those reservoirs compared to normal, and it had to be managed down. Now here's Maple Lake. This is the flow-through lake. Maple, Beach, Cameron, that whole system there is flow-through. So it's subject not only to what water gets released upstream from those 5 reservoirs, but it's also subject to local rainfall events. And these peaks that you see in July, early July, mostly reflect that local rainfall that occurred and has no control through there. But in any case, the good news was it never went beyond the extreme yellow line there. But even recently in August, we had significantly high flows coming through the flow-through lake. Here's the other flow-through lake that is a major constraint in Anna's water management. Shadow Lake is the last lake on the Gull River system before it enters Balsam Lake at the southern end. And it too has no dam. So what you see at Shadow Lake is what's coming down the system from Minden, from Gull Lake, from Moore Lake, and so on, plus the local precipitation events. And again, it was managed within the extremes, but they certainly had a variable year. If we look at the Burnt River, here's the drag lake levels, which make people like Martin Rist there happy because they had lots of water all summer long, never flooded. But the same thing happened. Look at how it came up in February and March as they captured what little bit of snow melt there was. And then it was possible to manage the system pretty much the way we wanted it all the way through. Here's Canning Lake downstream of Drag. And as I said, this is Cashawigamog and Head and Grass and Sawyers. And look at the amount of water management it took up and down, up and down, up and down to keep it near where we wanted it to be with all of that rainfall and all of the variable runoff patterns. And finally, this is the last slide. Here's Mississauga Lake. It happens to be my lake, but it's also an example of the central lakes managed pretty much on the average curve after we came up very early. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you with this slide is whenever you go to the water level graphs on our website, or you're linking to the Trent Severn website. Up in the left-hand corner, you've got a choice here. You can look at the graph or you can look at the table. Most people never look at the table. But if you look at the table, this is what you see. It's the actual water levels for the last 30 days in this first column. So you can look and see how much is my water level changing every day. And is that consistent? Is it 2 centimeters a day for the last 2 weeks? Or was it only 1 centimeter a day and now it's 3 centimeters a day? You can get a lot of information from looking at this table when you think changes are happening quickly on your lake. So don't just look at the graph at this time of year when water levels are changing quickly. Also look at the water level table, because it gives you interesting information to think about. And the last thing, of course, that you get at this time of year, every week, usually on Tuesday, this week it was Wednesday because of the holiday, but normally on Tuesday you get the drawdown forecast, which is the forecast of how much your lake is going to change in the next 2 weeks. It's a rolling forecast, so each week it gets replaced, but it's projecting out 2 weeks. So if we look here at Kinesis, for example, the third column says that Kinesis is going to drop 25 centimeters in the 2-week period starting on the 3rd of September. 25 centimeters, that's 10 inches. And a little further down that list, you see Hawk Lake at 45. That's almost half a meter in 2 weeks. But it's also the lake that has the largest range over the season. So this is a really useful thing to look at to see what's happening. It can't take account of the precipitation. We don't know what's coming. But this is, in a way, this is the fastest your lake is likely to go down in that 2-week period. And the final thing that I will go back to, as I always do, is our website. This is our website, which has been in operation now for more than a year, our new website. If you have time someday, look at under these 5 headings at the top, and you'll find a huge amount of information stored with respect to the details of the Trent Severn waterway, the reservoirs, their operations. Among other things, you'll find the annual water levels, graphs for every year since 2013. They're all archived there if you want to go back. When your neighbor says, it's never been this high before in history, well, you can always go back and look if you go to our website. But the most important thing on our website are the green buttons. This top one on the left gets you to the live water levels. The one in the middle takes you to the current drawdown forecast, then past drawdown forecasts. What did I do? That's not the website. What did I do? Anyway, it's not a bad thing, because that was our last slide. The right-hand green button on the top line allows you to sign up to get regular updates from us whenever we change our website. And the bottom big green button allows you to link to our videos, which of course we were pushing very hard last year. But we know that many, many people don't understand the complexity of the Trent Severn water system. And we encourage you to get your members and especially the residents on your lake who've never seen the videos to look at them, and they're right there on our website. So that's my commentary, and I want to pass it on now to Anna, who's going to explain to us what it's really like to work in that office and make all this stuff work. Can you bring up the next one, please?
Good.
Go for it.
Okay, is it the infrastructure one?
It's water management. Looks like it's an email.
Ooh, it's supposed to be-
No, he saved it as an email. I have it in my.
Okay,
What about this one here? Water management. That's dense.
that was the one we just saw.
Okay, let me just grab it from my use.
Yeah, number 3.
Yeah, it's not a PowerPoint for some reason. Okay.
Did you hear it?
Let's just bring it up.
Really?
Yeah, I saved as an email.
Oh, I got it.
Okay,
Yeah. Is it, it's not a touch screen, right?
no,
Just gonna go date modify, because that's the last file. It's gonna be this one here.
The last one I think was about.
Good.
Oh, he's got a copy. It's-
okay. We'll do it back here. Share. And this one, right?
Yep.
Screen sharing.
All right.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you.
Good morning. It's been a year since we've spoken, but I was happy to come up here. Yesterday I was part of the meeting at Kuching. Always pleasure to speak with the public stakeholders and explain the constraints and issues we have, despite, oh, I think I have this on the order. Okay, so I'll try to go back, but it's kind of great opportunity to always explain how difficult the system is, and it's perhaps it may look easy during calm, beautiful, sunny days in summer, but it isn't as let's just say pretty when you realize unpredictability in weather. And I do understand from Environment Canada, the greatest, one of the official agencies and folks who's been there with them modeling for at least good 30, 40 years, there's always evolution in technology. Modeling evolves, forecast evolves, but we still, as of today, see anything that's past the 24-hour forecast is not reliable. And all of us can see that regardless of the app we use. I think now there's so many, but the digital information still remains behind in terms of how well we have actually. And I just remembered saying that back at university days, I worked with the remote sensing prof, and she was doing, I guess, droplets counting with the radar of the clouds. And that was tough enough just to figure out how much rain you'll get. So that was so many years ago. So the forecast will probably be still lacking this, let's just say, spatial certainty. They are pretty good in terms of the intensity and summary, what the system will bring. But in terms of spatial distribution, there's always an issue. And I think Ted has shown that in the rain gauges. We never get this, we get it somewhere. And luckily our watersheds are stretchy enough to get it somewhere. Where we get it, this is what we wait for next day. Right, I'd just like to remind you, we do have always the constraints and competing interests. We retain the mandate as Ontario Waterways. Water management team is responsible for navigation, which means we must carry the system towards navigation open it hopefully on time. Make sure we don't shut it down during navigation season, so folks don't get stranded and with their boats and can't be mobile until we release the extra water. So that's our mandate. Close the navigation, let the canal be drained to where it should be drained based on the conditions on the ground, and we open it without flooding anyone. When we say that, it may look, as easy as just straightforward message, but we always realize that public and hold it in our mind that public safety, human life is always the mandate for making sure they're never at risk, and also public property and infrastructure and all the stakeholders and partners' properties and infrastructure are never at risk. So this is something we carry behind the mandate of navigation. Here, the slide that I always bring to the presentation, we also cognizant about species at risk, all the spawners that exist and inhabit all our waterways, invasive, non-invasive species, etc. They're still there, and we realize that we have to sustain the habitat for them. We also respect the surplus water for generation of the hydroelectric stations. So obviously, they are the providers of the generation as well in the province. We run into the dry cycles. Canals have been in their existence since 1833. That's when the first lock was built at Bob Cajun. You could see how long the history is, and that's how long the data goes to. someone brings the question of climate change, and Ted and I spoke about this on multiple occasions. Well, whatever extreme events that had happened since 1833, we've likely seen them before. And when they say, well, you're going to have 150 mils of rain coming, well, we've seen these events before, and we've seen how the system will respond. So typically when someone says, well, what's going to happen to my lake? We're already going to say, well, let me look at this 150 mil event, and that's roughly what you're going to get. So just happy to report, as of today, all the 130 so stations are now satellite and cellular transition. We no longer phone line users, thank God. I think that's just great to walk away from the phone lines, even though they probably were most reliable. The technology is here, but you could see how the, I guess, technology also is not quick to integrate. So we still have struggles, but we've accomplished at least the transitioning of how we connect to the gauge network and see all these wonderful numbers every day. This is the slide that Ted and I kind of also briefly spoke about. It's a lot of information here. You don't need to look into the table and read what you see there, but this is the daily information that all of us, and that includes myself, my team, sector managers and operators and external partners and stakeholders receive on a daily basis. This is an automation behind Trans-Severn Rideau canals. This is what keeps us upbeat. The system is integrated to have gentle reminders of what levels that perhaps we don't want to see, so that it will send us alarms indicating that, you know, hey, this location, that location, this location, another other location, times there are 10 when the big rain event is through, and it will keep reminding, annoying the sector managers, and that's my intentions, just to annoy them. Can you turn that alarm off? Because it's, and luckily, the space issue with cloud and IT is no longer a problem, right? Your emails are no longer over, you know, we don't get this Yahoo email saying you are out of space. Thank God. So I can keep sending those little emails saying this reach is above the minimum, below minimum, this reach is above maximum. So I think by annoying my colleagues, I get to the point. Those are soft alarms. Of course, we do have extreme alarms. Those ones come through DAX. You could see there's a screenshot of my phone. The cool part about it, it's happening at 2:27 a.m., 3:27 a.m. And then that's when I say, oh, well, why did you turn it on? Because I could see that it's not a significant alarm, but it's still going to keep waking me up, right? So they're alarms that designed to make sure that they're gentle and respectful, and there's some that will definitely get you up in the middle of the night and keep waking you up every hour until you fix the situation. My past slides very similar to this one. I use Environment Canada summary. These are official summaries from Meteorological Service of Canada. Those are 3 months total. So basically they take us from January all the way till August, and 3 graphs show the 3 seasons. So the most left one is winter. You could see, I guess, most biggest satellite cities such as Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto. We are in between. You could see Lake Simcoe boundaries, and right there above it is Haliburton. We could see this dark brown. Dark brown on the slide to the right will show that it's close to 40% below normal. I think that has given a very great distribution of how low the precipitation was, but that's just a summary from official agency stating that yes, the winter was definitely not the wet winter. Then all of a sudden we walk into a spring, and as Ted also shown monthly, but those are the 3 months of spring. We are now into nice green colors. Green colors is well above the normal precipitation. And then summer is like, you could see areas of Rideau Canal towards the north in Ottawa, they're getting up to 100% above normal, which means twice the normal precipitation. You also could see it in the spring, Lake Simcoe, and I chose to present Lake Simcoe as well today, the graph. We definitely got well above this events that definitely challenged us throughout the summer with the Lake Simcoe and its constraints. I always like to see the panic from everyone outside speaking about no winter. Does it make me nervous? I'm gonna say no until I hear officials declare something that does say, well, it isn't going to be dry season. So we sit and wait. We hear, we read. I like not to look at Twitter and complaints or Facebook. Yes, I understand people are worried. We want to hear more Environment Canada forecasts. So back in February, when we are seeing the low amounts of precipitation, low snow on the ground, we started to hear from Environment Canada as well, the official forecast of potentially dry summer. At that point, we also were forecasted to have a very early snow melt. So it's not the forecast of a dry summer or spring that triggered placement of the logs, but it's the loss of the snowpack as early as the end of February. So this is the snowpack that is designated to fill reservoirs for recreational season. The snowpack was not significant in its size. It was only 60% of normal. So by grabbing and keeping that snowpack in reservoirs would not have posed any challenges for Trans-Severn to regulate as we go through March, April, and May. So that was the decision made. Decision isn't made solely by me. Director of Ontario Waterways is obviously the superseding power. And the decision definitely confirmed by the director, and as Ted has identified, we typically choose the reservoirs that are most hard to fill. Those are the reservoirs that don't have a lot of local drainage, and obviously you could think of 12 Mile being not an issue here. We're looking at Essen Lake, we're looking at White Lake, the lakes that are hard to fill, Percy, for instance, looking at the headwater lakes, Kinesis. So those are the ones we want to make sure do get at least some kind of log being placed. Now, when we say we place the logs, doesn't mean we show up and then fill up all the logs to the brim. No, it's log by log, week by week, half a log here, one log there. Very, very carefully, we try to capture this runoff from the melt. Nothing aggressive, and this perhaps is at a cost of operational frequency, I understand, but that's where we are here for, not to create a panic, but also be capable to recover if this panic was not, really what the Mother Nature prepared for us. And that worked well. As you could see, when the spring came, we definitely received quite significant amount of rains. Have they caused any challenge for us? Absolutely, in some location, yes, and that would be Lake Simcoe, and that would be in my further down example. But you could see how multiple conservation authorities have struggled with localized flooding. GTA definitely issued quite a number of the warnings, and we've seen on the news the outcomes with the properties being flooded as well. Summer is much alike. We are seeing quite a large number of publications speaking to luxurious, I guess, farmers crops, and that's typically when we have nice amount of water for the vegetation that loves the water, whereas the vegetation like strawberries, I didn't like strawberries this year. They were not sweet, they were big, but that speaks to amount of water, right, that goes into the farmers and farmlands and what works best for the crops. Busy slide. Don't need to pay attention much to the left. On the right hand side is the distribution of snowpack. You could see the entire area of the Lake Simcoe, Kawarsas, and the southern Trent Rice Lake down to Lake Ontario were barren of snow. And then in February, the snow was gone. And then there's a quite low number of, quite low value of snow water equivalent, which is a snowpack on the ground in Haliburton's. Compared again to what Ted expressed, we only had maybe 60% of the snowpack that would compare to normal. The graphs to the left basically show us when the snow fell. It was one single event right early in January, and it was gone within a month. So really didn't stay at all, and didn't give us that certainty that will come back. And typically we do have mild midwinter melts, but the snow in Halliburton's will retain because of the snow metamorphosis. So it will melt, but it will still be in a snowpack as ice crystals or ice lenses, etc. This time it was actually the good forecast where the snow will be gone. This is the actual official melt. Speaking with Environment Canada and listening to their multiple presentation, of course, there was a lot of conversations on the news. We always call it a panic of climate change. Is that a climate change? Absolutely not what we've heard from the officials. It was a very typical pattern of El Nino. El Nino is one of the Pacific Ocean oscillation seasons. El Nino doesn't have the spatial pattern, but it has the physical representation pattern. And the physical representation pattern is above normal temperatures. When you have above normal temperatures, you just can't keep the snow on the ground. It's going to melt. That is just an answer for this year. Eastern Canada was chosen by El Nino system to put this pattern on our grounds, and that's what all the conservation authorities were reporting, and the Ministry of Natural Resources, the below normal snowpack, the snowpack that was simply gone because of this above normal air temperatures. Going back to Environment Canada presentations, this is the normal pattern that El Nino chooses for when it hits the Canada. I've been asked multiple times, what about climate change? Well, we simply sit right above the large lakes, and there's no mountains, obviously, so we don't get this orographic impact. But large lakes create a huge buffer for Eastern Ontario with all the systems that go through. So in terms of the actual science of climate change, I've had the opportunity for 10 years of my life to see those extremes in the Canadian Arctic. What we're seeing here isn't the actual extremes of climate change. I've seen the Arctic sea ice recede. I've seen the seasons being shorter in Arctic. I don't see this kind of extreme here, and I think climatologically, Great Lakes do take great care of buffering us and making it softer. Moving forward, this is just a typical slide for us showing what Ted represented back in his monthly totals. You can see in the light blue to the left corner, very tiny little snowpack, showed up and gone. Air temperature swings, you could see we didn't have much positives, a lot of more negatives towards the February 22nd. Once February 22nd hits, we actually see in temperatures as high as 10 degrees. So the snow was definitely gone as a result of warm temperatures. And then we had a good, relatively flat cumulative black line, which means very dry March, until we see those big bumps. And those big bumps are those rain events that start to arrive in a significant manner. Thinking about normal precipitations are 10 to 15 mils or so a week, 90 millimeters a month. We're seeing 70s coming as a result of 2 to 3 day event, right? So those are well above normal types of precipitation. If you look at today's where we stand, we are at 900 millimeter total versus the normal, which is 670. So it has been overall normal contribution of precipitation for at least spring and summer length. I was actually happy to see the graph. I don't plot them to myself every day. I don't look at what that shows, but I always enjoy coming here and say, well, that doesn't look that bad. Kene's done great and Oblong, and so that looks good on us. And when I saw this red line tagging along with 2023, I said, wow, we actually nailed it this year too, right? So you look at every lake, and each lake is challenging in its own course, and we I guess make decisions for them and with the group independently. We don't look at the total summary. I don't graph it for myself. I just make sure that we are targeting where we should be. So that's nice to see that we've done quite well. I mean, I think this graph just shows the early melt. It deviates from last year by a good month here, where the red deviates from the green. Quick jumps on with the red line are our precipitation events. I think the red line also shows where we would have been without those rain events. We're probably right around 80%. And then we would be struggling to savor every precipitation event that we would be getting, right? Which means not great for maple or shadow. Those would be simply down to minimal flows, environmental flows that we must sustain to ensure that there's some kind of water running down the river. But you could see how those rain events were beneficial for us to fill reservoirs, but you could see how we halted the fill immediately in the month of May, and that halting of the fill worked well. We didn't get surreal overbanking of the shorelines when we received those significant rain events in the month of June, when the reservoirs were gladly around 95% full. And that, I think, hopefully brings the message why we don't fill the lakes to the brimming full, is because of this kind of seasons. And we've seen them before, and hearing from Environment Canada, it's pretty much normal. I think the most efforts are seen in this graph. This is the Waters of Canada Gull River at Norland. I chose to compare 2023 to 2024. You could see a typical normal peak in 2023 with the runoff as a result of the snow melt. We did hit good 65. That's reasonable melt for last year. And in the blue line towards the summer shows some of our active presence to maneuver the water out of reservoirs as we received those rain events. Quite a lot of times we ended up to be below average, which is very thin dash line. Now we look at this year. This year was nothing like 2023. We don't see this freshet or snowmelt peak at all. It's absent. So we didn't have winter. Everything that's been brought to the system or removed from the system is generated by rain event alone. You could see how the Gull River flow slides well below the average and normal for the spring freshet. And this is where we actively trying to grab everything we can from runoff in reservoirs, storing this water to being able to fill them to at least some targets of hopefully 75 to 80%. And that's what the total graph from reservoir showed. The snowpack guaranteed 80% or so filling. But you could see this active swings now during the month of April. This is April typically driven by the snow melt. Those were not snow melt driven swings. Those were definitely just the rain events. You could see how we flush the water out and cut back, right? Once that water arrives in reservoirs and where spatially it gets, we target those reservoirs, and Gull River sees it also. You could see how operations were very quick at it, flush it out and cut back, flush it out and cut back. The challenges that we've seen this year is when I work with the public, I do hear what causes issue, and we record all this information. Recreation is very respectful season for water management as well. We understand that we're not going to go, wild and say we're going to open the dams and flush it down and cut back. We have to do it in stages because we know dogs are out, children are out, people are using the shorelines for the recreational use. So we stick to the maximal flows that are safe for public recreational use. We understand the Halliburtons are not canal lakes, which means there's no navigational safety or let's say limits, whereas the canal has the historic limits where the boats have certain velocities where we do have to shut down navigation. The history of management from Halliburtons also have given us enough records to say, where does maple get too high? And you'll see, this is what Ted has shown in a graph. Maple didn't hit the extremes. That's because our team was out on Saturday morning or Sunday morning, seeing it's going in the wrong direction. Let's cut back into Eagle. It wasn't the preference of holding the reservoirs up above the normal for the entire summer. It's because this recreational sites of the flow-through lakes were sustained to their comfortable maximum flow. This was the best effort for water management. We just didn't go in a rog and say, let's just pull Eagle down and Redstone and get it moving faster, or 12 Mile and Horseshoe and Gull Lake just to get through Shadow and be done with this. This could have been done perhaps in the spring outside of recreational, but this year that was the challenge where we kept a very good eye, attentive eye, speaking with Shadow Lake Association, speaking with Maple, looking at the history and saying, okay, let's just make sure we don't overwhelm the borders. Let's make sure we don't have the swings the way we operated. So we very gently and carefully moved the water out of the system. Kawartha Lake's definitely a challenge as usual. Halliburton's were the base flow for us. I mean, elevated base flow. We didn't go to minimal. You could see also Kawartha Lakes were filled with the rain events mainly. The rain event we received back in April generated nice inflows in Burnt River that allowed us to fill Kawartha Lakes. You could see how we targeted them to come down. Obviously, April being at full supply and ready for navigation, it's a no-go. We have to make sure that we don't flood and open with the safe flows during the month of May. So you could see us targeting the red line down in the month of April, still too early, and only raising the water levels to the recreational values when we were ready. That means quite a bit of operations for our workers on the ground. You could see the blue line, it continuously swings up and down. I mean, there's just really never a break for them. There's really never normal. This kind of rain events definitely cause quite a bit of operational requirements. This is the Severn River Basin. Blue line above is Lake Simcoe. The orange, or I guess pink line, is Simcoe average. You could see that this lake that never gotten to its average value despite the efforts we applied to operate Washago dams. What does it mean for Lake Simcoe? It's quite, I guess, astonishing. Lake Simcoe is the same water body with Lake Couchiching, which is north of Lake Simcoe. It drains through very tiny little hydraulic restriction called Atherley Narrows. So it's basically, if you think of a balloon and you squeeze a balloon right in a 3/4 area, this much, there's a big water body, which is Lake Simcoe, and there's a smaller water body, which is Lake Couchiching and dams at the bottom. This bottleneck here holds Lake Simcoe high and drains Lake Couchiching, right? So we go ahead and start opening the dams, and of course, everyone downstream will be impacted as well, right? As we're trying to aggressively draw Lake Simcoe. It takes months and months for Lake Simcoe to respond to these activities. But what happens to all the recreational boaters in Couchiching? They see this huge drop, right? They see this 20, 10, 15 centimeters drop, and really Couchiching is based on 20 centimeters of range. So everything built there it's a shallow water body when you really come and look at it. So it's very understandable how recreational boating and the use of the lakes is severely impacted. The comfort and the enjoyment are impacted by the years like this, where we try to do as much as we can and realize the risks that are taken by Lake Simcoe and Holland Marsh and the farmers. When Lake Simcoe is subject to the windstorms, they're quite an impact to all those low-lying areas with the wind waves up to 2 meter high. So it's understandable when we do get complaints of how high the lake is, and approaching the fall season, we try to stick to the rule curve, understanding that arrival of the ice and freeze up on Lake Simcoe, it definitely will cause potential damage. So managing Lake Simcoe, you could see the green line, which is our operations. You could see green line hitting up to 200 cubic meters per second. That is the flood-like conditions for people's basements down in the Severn River. So we had multiple complaints, people looking, sending us pictures where the water is, how many centimeters and it is from the basement. But you could see us working as much as we can to get this water out of the system and to open navigation on time as well, right? So here we are receiving all this rain back in April when it's really not the time to get all that rain, and trying to open on time as well with quite high flows and Simcoe sitting very high. So this year has been a challenge year for Lake Simcoe, a challenge year for operations. Things are never, I'm going to say, as they should be. We do have multiple generating stations across the system. It's normal to go through the mechanical failures or issues. Power plants do go offline for their management and maintenance, and they typically happen during navigation, which means we also run with the high flows and challenges of maintenance. So it's the stuff that's happening in the background, but we still make it happen to make sure boats do travel through the system and we retain the navigation open. So it's a challenge in summer for sure, but as my good old boss would say, it will rain. And that's what I always told Ted when we spoke, and he said, yeah, right. It will rain, and we always see this rain comes. The biggest issue is how to handle the rain without any potential outcomes. So I'll end it here. Thank you.
Anne is going to have to leave us fairly soon.
Yep.
So I hope let me come with the
Yep.
microphone. Don't go away.
Mhm.
Anne is going to have to leave us, so we're going to deal with a few questions right now. I hope that's all right with you, David. David Britton is on the line here and is going to be talking to us in about 5 minutes. But any questions for Anna?
I have one.
Here's one back here.
It's hard to the maps, and I haven't really
Sure.
the relationship between our systems up in the Northeast and the relationship with Couchiching and Simcoe. Maybe I could explain the dynamic there, because I've not heard that before. And I do know like Couchiching, they're all very shallow through there, very sandy shores, and very dense along the shorelines. But maybe you could explain how our water relates to their water, or it's the same water.
Yeah, the only connection point is the guard gate and the canal cut between Balsam Lake and Mitchell Lake, and Mitchell Lake eventually drains into the Talbot system. It's a very small tributary of Lake Simcoe, not very impactful. The only time we do get impacted when it's very dry and we have to sustain navigation through the that section of Talbot River. So reservoirs do supply the minimal flow through the Gull River, which enters Balsam and goes from Balsam Lake through that canal cut into the Mitchell area just to sustain that minimal navigation range. That's the only when you get impacted. We shut off the connection right after navigation closure, and once the Kawartha Voyager moves and parks himself in the lift lock basin, that's where they park for the season. I'm not sure if you know Kawartha Voyager, one of the biggest recreational boats in the system. Once they park, we raise the guard gate, and at that point, the Trent Severn is separated from the Severn. Sorry, the Trent Canal is separated from the Severn Canal. Not a significant impact at all. The canal is tiny, so it's not going to have any impact at all.
Will?
I have an online question from Chris Tass. He's on Maple Lake. He wants to know if how they can better anticipate the water that is being let down from the upstream reservoirs, and if it's related to the drawdown forecast, if we could better explain how better to interpret that information. And then lastly, when those reservoirs are letting down, what's the average time it takes for the water to get from the dam to the lakes?
Okay. Well, so that's a great question. I think the best direct answer to use the forecast is during dry seasons. As we are trying to sustain just above minimal flow for Maple, and definitely the source of water for Maple will be via Eagle Dam and Redstone West. The travel time from our operations at Eagle Dam is 3 days when we operated, after we operated, and 1 day from Redstone West. So that's when the Maple Lake gauge will see it. So obviously we have to be proactive when it's dry. when it's wet, it's very hard to run the forecast altogether. I mean, it's a mathematical estimate of the drop as a result of the opening at the dam control structure. But the rain and the local inflows are challenging. So Maple Lake can expect to be close to normal or averages when when we have slightly wet summers. When the summers are normal or below normal, Maple Lake can expect to be just above minimal, and that's when we are carefully drawing reservoirs upstream to sustain that minimal flow through Maple. It's just the gamble here with the inflows. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Anna? Rita?
Anna, how large is your team that's managing the system?
Yeah, it will be myself and 3 technicians. One of the technicians is based in Rideau Canal, and 2 of them are on the Trent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's important to realize that her team is not just covering the Trent side of this system, covering the Severn side, Lake Simcoe Severn side, and the Rideau Canal up towards Ottawa and Kingston as well. So it's a very complex early morning set of alarms that can be waking Anne up in the middle of the night from any of those dams. And as she said, as of this year, they're all connected by telemetry. So it doesn't matter if Bell lines go down in the ice storm, she's still connected and knows what's happening. So let me thank you very much again, and I'm sorry you have to leave us.
I'm very sorry as well myself.
I will certainly be in touch with you, and I'll bring the rest of the questions as they come up later. And if we have an opportunity, have you got anything else there, Will?
Nothing, just a thank you from Sharon saying she's learned so much and she has to leave the call.
Oh, there we go. All right. Okay, well, I'd like now to introduce David Britton, who's the Director of Ontario Waterways. Anna's boss, often Anna's partner in a lot of critical decision-making, like when to start putting logs back in dams and things like that. And David is online from Godrich, I believe. Can you bring up his presentation, please? There's David.
I'm just
Good to see you, David.
Can you hear me, Ted?
We're not hearing you. Just a second. Why he's...
David, we can hear you online, so it's probably something to do on site.
Okay.
Allow him to speak.
Can you hear me now?
He's not.
Presentation.
We want his presentation and we want to hear him.
Is that this one? Infrastructure?
Yes, infrastructure. No. Can you get him so he's able to talk to us? David, go ahead. Can we hear you?
I'll just do
Perfect.
mic check. Okay,
We got it.
great. Ted, can I ask somebody to advance the slides for me? Because I'll just call out when I need them to go
I'll
ahead.
do that.
Correct.
Although you saw me earlier, I'm not very good at it, but I'll try. I need a mouse. I don't have a mouse here.
Sure, we'll be fine.
Go for
All right. Well, thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk to you today. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'll make it to this meeting one of these days. But I'm nevertheless glad to be able to attend virtually. So I'm going. Anna talked and Ted as well at some length about the sort of the water management decision making and operations that we went through this year. I'm going to talk about something that is a sort of fits hand in glove with that and is as important, which is the infrastructure component. So the dams that we use to deliver water management in the reservoir area and on the main channel of the Trent Severn Waterway. Next slide.
There it is.
Perfect. So in terms of some of the priorities that we have for the dams, and Anna talked a little bit about this in her presentation as well. You know, we do balance a number of different priorities in terms of the operation of our dams and making sure that our dams are operable. One of them is obviously the public safety component. So that's mitigating flood risks for purposes of protecting people and property. We also, you know, we operate a heritage canal and one that is also part and parcel of a living ecosystem. So protecting heritage both on the natural and cultural side. And the dams also deliver the water levels that are required for navigation on the Trent Severn Waterway, which is an important economic driver in the communities that are along the main channel. Next slide. So running a canal is an extremely infrastructure intensive operation. So we have on the Trent Severn Waterway, including in the reservoir area, about 140 dams and water control structures. We've got 36 conventional locks, 2 lift locks, 2 flight locks, and a marine railway. If you look in sort of in the context of where we sit in Parks Canada, so the Ontario Waterways Field Unit, which is the unit that I'm responsible for. So that's the Trent Severn Waterway and the Rideau Canal. Collectively, if the current replacement value of the assets in those units is about $8 billion, that's the estimate. I mean, in real life, it would cost a lot more if we had to rebuild both those systems from scratch now. But just to put it into context, that's probably about 3 times the asset base in Banff National Park. So it's a very large component of the infrastructure that Parks Canada has. And in the context of the federal government, Parks Canada is one of the largest infrastructure holding departments, along with National Defence, DFO, Corrections, and Public Works. Next slide.
Oops.
So beginning in about 2015, we embarked on a very large period of infrastructure renewal on Ontario Waterways and the Trent Severn Waterway generally, but in Parks Canada writ large. That we called this the Federal Infrastructure Investment, and it kind of spanned from 2015 to about 2021. During that period of time, we completed about 100 projects in the field unit across both the waterways, including a large number of dam replacements in the reservoir area. So the list is here. This sort of spans back to the beginning of that program. The last dam completed under that program was Red Pine, which was finally completed last year. So we've got about 14 dams that have been replaced in the reservoir area to date. Next slide. So really I would say the primary driver when we're prioritizing projects for the capital program is risk. And so there is a lot of data gathering and preparation that goes into planning the capital program. And that involves a fair bit of monitoring and study so that we understand the structural condition of the assets, including the dams, and we can prioritize them appropriately based on the risk and how close they are getting to the end of their lifespan. We've been doing a lot of this work, and it is fairly labor intensive, and it is what really guides our prioritization. And that is very much a evergreen process. You know, we are, as you'll see on the next slide, frequently doing new studies, new dam safety reviews, and that updates our information, and that as new information comes in, we may have to prioritize projects or reprioritize projects based on asset condition. Next slide. So at the moment, we are engaged in, or have been engaged in, a large number of dam safety reviews. And so these are large projects. They're consultant driven. They involve a variety of studies, hydrotechnical and structural, that look at the dams and their limitations. As you can see, a large number are complete. There are a few on this slide that are marked complete that are actually underway, particularly in the Central Lakes, where we're just starting, Anstruther, Crystal, Mississauga, Eels, and on the Burnt, where we're doing Contau and Loon, Pusey, and Farquhar. So those are actually underway right now. But these are very important studies because when we come to replacing a dam, the information that's gathered in these dam safety reviews both give us the information to know how to prioritize the projects, but also they inform the design of the new dam that we create as a result of a dam replacement project. Next slide. So in terms of where we're looking at in the next little while, in budget 24 earlier this year, the federal government did allocate additional capital funding to Parks Canada on the order of about $500 million over 3 years. And so that is currently going through some internal approval processes, both within Parks Canada and within the federal government writ large at the Treasury Board level. So we're waiting to hear. We'll likely hear on at some point in the next 2 to 3 months about funding approvals. But in terms of our priorities in the reservoir area where we might see projects moving forward, we've got Elliott Falls and Little Brother on the Gull River system, and then on the burnt system Essen Lake, where we had a earth dam failure a number of years ago, looking to replace the dam there, and Long Lake, sometimes called Long Muscogee because it controls both lakes. So these are the sort of the next 4 that we're looking at dam replacements, and we should know in the next 2 to 3 months whether we'll have funding to move those projects forward. Next slide. A couple of other things that aren't asset related that I'll just mention briefly. In the Front Severn Waterway Management Plan that was tabled in Parliament a couple of years ago, one of the commitments is for us to develop a water management communications plan. So that's something that we plan on undertaking over the course of this winter. And really that is not in really reinventing how we communicate. I think it's really codifying it, being transparent about it, and bringing a little more consistency to it. And so, you know, as we sort of move through different water management situations, the way we communicate is different. And we've got a number of different ways that we communicate. So we've got the website, which is ongoing and you know, people can access at any point in time. We have the semi-regular water management updates. We've got the drawdown schedule that comes out beginning in the middle of the summer. But when we get into more challenging water management situations, particularly in spring freshet, we've got other modes of communication that we undertake. Anna will begin speaking much more frequently to conservation authorities and MNRF. We may begin reaching out to municipalities if risk levels get higher, and First Nations and stakeholder groups like the CEWF. And so it's really the plan is to kind of codify that and make it transparent so everyone understands the approach we're taking to communications. And that's definitely, as we develop it, something that we would be consulting with CEWF on and getting comments. The second thing I'll mention is Bill C-23, the Historic Places Act. So this is an act that is currently before Parliament. Its main purpose is to provide a regulatory and legal framework for national historic sites in Canada, which currently doesn't exist. Within Parks Canada, we have a very well-developed set of laws and regulations to apply to national parks, but really very little for national historic sites. Both the Trent Severn Waterway and the Rideau Canal are national historic sites, so they would fall under this act. It has some very specific provisions in it that are relevant to the historic canals. So just there are 3 in particular. So one, it does provide a little bit of legal clarity that, you know, that we do have the you know, the legal right for water management. I mean, we have it de facto because we own the dams, but it is a for greater clarity statement just to provide a legal authority for that. Secondly, it allows for the modernization of the historic canal regulations. So these regulations are under the jurisdiction of Transport Canada. They date back to when the canals were administered by Transport Canada, which is over 50 years ago. So it gives you a little bit of a sense of how modern they are. They really, they are dated, and they provide us with challenges on a very regular basis. As I would say, mainly in the management of the main channel, less so in the reservoir lakes, but nevertheless, it's an important step for us to be able to bring those under Parks Canada's jurisdiction, which was what the legislation will do, and then enable us to modernize them. The final thing that it will do is put in place a law enforcement regime to administer those regulations. Under the current regulations, our wardens have very, very limited powers and penalties that they can enforce. Much less than what you would see in the National Parks Act. And so it's really to put the canals and other national historic sites on an equal footing with national parks in terms of the ability to enforce the regulations. So that's it for the presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions. I think I saw a couple pop up in the chat there.
Yeah, so there's two questions in the chat. So we'll start. Michael has asked, does a new dam bring with it any new technologies, capabilities, capacity? Repeat the question.
Yeah, so I would say largely our dam replacement projects have mostly been in kind. I mean, they do certainly modernize the infrastructure, make it safer in terms of the operability, railings, the way that the sluices are constructed. In some cases, we have increased capacity of the dams, but that's not necessarily advantageous in all situations, because in many situations, including in the reservoir area, you can increase the capacity of the dam, but the maximum flow is controlled by upstream obstruction, so it doesn't get you anything. Or there are limitations downstream where you would never want to flow more out of the dam than we do now, because you'd end up causing a problem downstream. So, I mean, it's something that we look at, but there are limited situations where it's actually viable. In terms of more mechanical improvements, during the program, we did do mechanization of gates on one dam in Port Severn. But the lesson learned there is, I mean, to be honest with you, it's quite expensive, and we have to be very careful with our resources. We've got a large number of dams to replace. And so, as nice as it would be to have mechanized dams, we have a lot of dams to replace, and we need to spread that money across them. So at this point in time, it's probably not something we'd be pursuing any further.
And the second question comes from Shelley Fellows. Given the historic importance and poor condition of the Hawk Lake log chute, have any funds been planned or budgeted to repair any repairs to that chute?
So let me just repeat the question for those online. The question relates to the log chute at the Hawk Lake Dam, and the question is, have any funds been set aside to deal with that?
So we have done a DSR there. So it is one of the dams that's on the list of assets to look at replacing. We haven't got to the point of actually doing any design there yet, but it is certainly a well-known feature of that dam. And so, I mean, we would definitely be looking at what rehabilitation is needed to that structure, because it is owned by Parks Canada.
Anyone else?
That's it for questions online.
Can I correct that?
Carol? Yes, please do.
David Carroll Moffat speaking.
Can you hear this, David?
No, maybe you could repeat the question once it's finished, Ted.
Yeah, okay. It's Carol Moffat, the former mayor of Algonquin Highlands, and she's coming to the microphone. Of course, she's very comfortable.
No, I was just going to say that I will need to have a chat, because I think that the chute is actually owned by the township.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong about that.
there would need to be a bit of a relationship there for that project.
Yeah.
There are some complications in terms of funding and insurance. And having done the one that is now fallen apart, my husband says he's got one more log chute left in him. So
That's
when the
good to
time
know.
comes, we should have a chat about that.
Most definitely. Thanks, Carol.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Yes, please. From the audience.
Given that we are dealing with climate change, no matter what position we take in the interim with respect to the changing oscillation of the earth, if I'll put it that way, how are you building climate change modeling into your 10-year capital works program?
Okay, David,
Static situation, little tweaks, I don't think is going to work, given what we're facing in the future with that thing. Most of it is accept. And the other thing is, I just wondered how much tourism is considered in the infrastructure you're making and the transfer system. That's all. Thank you.
David, two questions. The first relates to climate change and how you are building climate change into your 10-year plan for asset reconstruction and repair and so on. And the second question was,
Is given the growth in tourism.
Yeah, how
many countries around the world are spending a lot of infrastructure revenue on. How are you building that? How is that appreciated within your?
yeah, the second question relates to how does tourism figure in your long-range planning and your expenditure planning?
So in terms of the question about climate change, I mean, it's certainly something that we think about quite a bit. It is factored into the dam safety reviews when they're looking at the hydrotechnical studies and to a lesser extent, the structural. I mean, in terms of capacity and changing the capacity of the dams, there's, as I mentioned before, there's little flexibility to do that, just given the channels that they're built in and the surrounding infrastructure. I think, you know, to get to the point that Anna's made earlier about the historical extremes, we have a lot, like in most cases, over a century of climate data. In the last, 10 to 20 years, we've seen very few situations that have exceeded extremes that have existed. So in terms of what the system has seen before, I mean, there hasn't been a lot new there. I think what has been new and what we do have to be very careful about is the frequency with which we get those extreme events and the seasonality with which they occur, which seems to be changing. And so, similar to the unusual situation this spring, we've also had essentially like spring freshets that came in January when we had a heavy snowfall followed by a quick melt in early 2023. So that's less about the infrastructure and more about our capacity and availability of staff to operate it. So that's something else that we're looking at very closely. In terms of the tourism side of it, I mean, certainly on the main channel, tourism is very important. Like we have a lot of relationships with the communities on the main channel because of the boat traffic that's associated with the lock stations. So, places like Campbellford and Frankfurt, Trenton, Bobcaygeon, Peterborough, Fenland Falls, Port Severn, Aurelia. So, I mean, that is something that we work closely with those communities on in terms of our operations to try and make sure that they can get the maximum tourism benefits out of the boat traffic. I think it's been less of a discussion in the reservoir area where we don't manage navigation and boat traffic between lakes. We do manage the water levels, of course. And so, I think maybe there is opportunities to have some conversations with the municipalities there, but it's less of a direct economic benefit in the reservoir area than it is on the main channel.
Thank you, David. Are there any other questions? One more coming.
Do you have any measure of the economic activity that is supported in the reservoir lakes by the lakes versus the economic activity that's taking place in the canals. So that you can have a scientific discussion about that.
The question is, do you have any hard data that would compare the economic activity and the value of the reservoir lakes in their area compared to the economic activity and activities generated in the canal system?
No, we wouldn't, not that I've ever seen. Like, certainly there is some data on the main channel. That data is quite dated now. Like, we're probably going back more than 10 years. And I have never seen any information that we've collected on economic benefits in the reservoir lake area.
Right. All right. One last question.
I raise these issues because I think your future is going to be much different than your past. And the economic potential of the Trans-Siberian system is, I think, quite fundamental to Southern Ontario's prosperity in tourism. And of course, using that as a lever, that would also provide you with greater opportunity for a capital budget fund, which would also help you with climate change, because climate change is coming to this area very rapidly. And I'm not sure we're very well prepared if we treat it as if it's history rather than our future. That's the only point.
Did you hear that, David?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think more a comment than a question, but I mean, I certainly agree that, you know, both on both points about the, you know, the importance that the canal has from a local economic development, tourism, and and also the, you know, the need to be very cognizant of climate change and how it could potentially impact us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, David. And let me apologize for interrupting your annual vacation for the third or fourth year in a row. It does look like you're more comfortable this year than 2 years ago when you were at the picnic table at the ferry landing at Feely Island. But we really appreciate your taking the time from your holiday to spend some time with us and to answer these questions and to make this presentation.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Ted. It was my pleasure to be here.
Okay, we'll be in touch again soon. Thank you.
Bye now.
Now, the next stage of our agenda is we're moving more to our CEWF operational report for our members.